We move immediately, a little bit late unfortunately, Standing Order 36 and Leaders' Questions. Deputy Mary Lou MacDonald.
Yesterday I raised the need to introduce an emergency ban on rent increases for 3 years. Even though workers and families are being hammered by relentless rent hikes, you again dismissed that call. Over the 12 years that Fine Gael have been in government, life has become increasingly hard for renters. In that time, rents have more than doubled. The latest Residential Tenancy Board report simply crystallises the lived reality for renters. They are ripped off every single month. New rents up nearly 12% this year. That's the highest annual increase since RTB records began. And even the news for existing tenants is bad. Their rents are up 5% across the state and 5.5% here in Dublin. So Taoiseach, this hasn't come out of the blue. Since this government came to office, the regular reports from the RTB and daft.ie show rents going in one direction, and that is up. So what does this mean in real terms? Well, since government took office, across the state you now have to find, on average, an additional €3,800 to pay for a new rent. In Dublin, the price to renters for a new rent is an additional €4,700. So where on earth do renters fleeced for over a decade and now living through a cost of living crisis find that money? These extortionate rents mean that many young people are unable to save for a mortgage deposit. It sets them back in a very big way. We also have a huge increase in young adults living at home with their parents. Rents are too high, and so the journey to home ownership has become increasingly difficult, impossibly difficult for many. According to the Banking and Payments Federation, nearly half of first-time buyers are now over the age of 35. The average mortgage taken out by first-time buyers has surged. It stands at €315,000 for new builds. Here in Dublin, the average mortgage taken out by first-time buyers stands at nearly €500,000 for a new build and over €387,000 for existing bills. So this is crazy stuff, Taoiseach, I'm sure you will agree. The reality is first-time buyers are saddled with higher debt and higher monthly repayments. Under this government, home ownership is becoming more difficult, more distant and more expensive. And all the while, government continues to set affordable housing targets that are far too low and keeps missing those targets. So tá sé inam dahru ceart igor Kishori. Caithí an rialtas cosca cur ardathe Ciasa fag 3 bliana von Prania. So we desperately need a change in direction, Taoiseach. We need now to give this generation the chance that it deserves, and government must finally step up and tackle extortionate rent increases. The big question that renters are now asking is how bad does it have to get before government intervenes with decisive action? When will the penny drop that an emergency ban on rent increases is required to give squeezed, ripped-off renters the space and the breathing room that they need to build a decent future? Renters are pushed to the brink. So I'm asking you, Taoiseach, to reconsider your position. I'm asking you again to ban rent increases for 3 years.
Thanks very much, Deputy. I appreciate that. A lot of renters in Ireland are paying very high rents, and a lot of people who are renting don't want to rent. They want to be able to own their own home, and government understands that lived experience. We don't agree with your proposed policy of a across-the-board rent freeze for 3 years, precisely because we think it would be counterproductive. It would reduce the amount of supply, it would reduce the number of rental properties available, and would leave more people with no place to rent, and would probably therefore lead to a rise in homelessness. That's why we do not agree with your proposal. What can we do for renters? Increase supply of places to rent. That will mean fewer people who are homeless. It will also mean lower rents in the round. And we do that by ramping up the supply of places to rent. More homes, more apartments, both public and private. How do we do that? Particularly by investing in social housing. And I'm proud to lead a government that is building more new social housing every year than any year since the 1970s. I'm proud to lead a government that has made cost rental housing a reality. Government provided rental properties for those who don't qualify for social housing, and we're ramping that up, and we'll ramp it up a lot more over the next few years. And social housing is something that benefits everyone. It doesn't just take people off the housing list, it also frees up rental properties for other people to rent and exerts a downward pressure on rents and on property prices. And it's good to see that in the past 10 years, the number of people who rent from the state, who are in social housing, the number of families who benefit from social housing has increased by 40,000 and has also increased in percentage terms. And that blasts the myth from the fake left that somehow this government and the previous one didn't believe in social housing or wasn't committed to social housing. Raw numbers, percentages, any way you want to look at it. There's more people who benefit from social housing today than was the case when the census was done in 2011. The other thing we're doing for renters is the rent credit. €750 next year, €500 this year. And bear in mind that's per renter, not per property. So a couple sharing an apartment, both working, paying income tax, they can claim $1,500 back. That's roughly a month's rent back into their pockets. 3 people sharing $2,250, and would really encourage people to take up that rent credit. Pretty good take up last year, not so much this year. Now you can claim it 3 years in arrears, and would encourage people to do that. And of course parents can claim it on behalf of their children if they're students who are renting, and that's making a real and practical difference for renters. In terms of housing and being able to buy, Deputy, again, I just want to remind you that we're seeing record numbers of first-time buyers in Ireland now, the highest that we've seen since 16 years. That is encouraging. I want it to be a lot more. And that didn't happen by accident. It's because of increased supply, in part because we've suspended development levies, something Sinn Féin opposed. It's because of the Help to Buy scheme, where we give hard-working young people their income tax for the last 3 years back so they can afford a deposit, something Sinn Féin opposes. It's because of schemes like First Home, which bridges the gap between the amount you can borrow, the amount the bank will lend you, and the cost of the house. Again, something Sinn Féin opposes, because Sinn Féin is actually against home ownership, and that's the truth.
Thank you, Count Corla. So the realities are these, that we have waiting lists for social housing that are unbearable. I have dealt with people who have spent years on social housing waiting lists. I assume you have too. I'm assuming that you've met these people and these families. So as you brag about social housing delivery, just be very, very aware that tens of thousands of people who languish on lists know the real story. As you brag about housing delivery and you talk about downward pressure on rents, there is no downward pressure on rents. I've just given you the figures, a 12% increase on new rents, the highest since the RTB started to report, 5%, 5.5% for existing rents. This is a runaway train, Taoiseach. And I am asking you to intervene in a real and substantive way. And I think if you were really interested in giving young people in particular the breathing room to put together a deposit, to have a chance and an option to purchase their own home, or even to live decently in rental accommodation, that is the action that you would take.
Thank you very much. Taoiseach.
Thanks, Deputy. There's no need to be condescending. It may come natural to you, but it's unbecoming. Unbecoming somebody who wishes to be Taoiseach. And once again, Deputy, you engaged in misrepresentation and misleading behaviour, because you are the great misleader. I didn't say that there was downward pressure on rents. I know rents are rising. I said that increased social housing exerts downward pressure on rent, and that's just a fact. And you know it's a fact, but it doesn't matter what I say. You'll twist, manipulate, mislead, because you are the great misleader, Deputy. And Deputy, of course I meet people all the time who are on the housing list for far too long. Anybody in this House deals with a huge number of housing cases in their clinics and in their constituency offices. But I also meet people all the time who are now buying their first home. And I see the enormous joy when people get to move into their first home. And I also meet loads of people now who are getting social housing. Over 1,000 a month, people moving into new social housing. And there's one thing that a lot of those people have in common. They're moving into houses that were opposed by Sinn Féin.
Deputy Ivana Bacik, please. Please. Deputy, can we? No, please. Can we have order for the Leader of the Labour? Deputy Farrell, please. Can we have order for the Leader of the Labour Party?
Guramahagut Count Corla. Taoiseach, this week we have seen the humanitarian situation in Gaza worsen still further. And after the brief glimmer of hope last week with the humanitarian pauses, we've seen absolute devastation wreaked across the Gaza Strip, with reports now of 16,000 people killed, 16,000 civilians, including thousands of children. Gazans facing utter deepening horror, the UN tells us, as disease spreads, as food is scarce, as humanitarian aid is all but cut off. Volker Turk, the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, saying this week that the situation is apocalyptic. His colleagues describing the situation as being like this, that the remnants of a nation are being driven into a pocket in the south. UN officials told to empty warehouses of goods and to move on. Where to go? There is nowhere to go for people in Gaza. So Taoiseach, I think nearly all of us in this House condemned the brutal attack by Hamas when it was carried out on the 7th October. But nothing excuses Israel's brutal retaliation and bombardment and carpet bombing of Gaza, Israel's breach of international law. Israel's breach of international law and resultant commission of war crimes have effectively turned Gaza into a city of ruin. And indeed, that was what Netanyahu threatened on 7th October. And that threat has now been realised with these unthinkable consequences for so many civilians forced to leave their homes, seeing their friends, their family, their children killed, seeing buildings and infrastructure turned into rubble. We've seen hospitals targeted. We've seen UN facilities targeted. And seemingly no end in sight, 2 months on from the outset of this most recent awful war. So Taoiseach, while many of us have been proud of Ireland's strong stance in support of Palestinian rights and have supported the government on that, we are now urging you to do more, because government can do more. We're all continuing to receive correspondence, thousands of emails from people across the country who want the government to do more, who are urging a stronger stance at international level from you in government and indeed here in Ireland too. We want to see a stronger response from Ireland, pushing at EU level to ensure that that other EU member states can be brought on board to seek that crucial goal of a permanent humanitarian ceasefire. So Taoiseach, will you update the House now on your government's response to what are now genocidal policies being conducted by Netanyahu and his government? Will you tell us how you're going to work at European Council next week to ensure that pressure is brought to bear on your colleagues? And you, I'm conscious, of course, are a member of the European People's Party. Your party is in the group that is the biggest grouping in the European Parliament. The President of the Commission, von der Leyen, is drawn from the European People's Party too. We know that on the agenda next week at the European Council, EU leaders are to discuss the situation in the Middle East. So what will you be doing at EU level to push for a ceasefire and to put pressure on Netanyahu's government to ensure that we see an end to this horrific toll on civilians in Gaza?
Taoiseach, please.
Thanks, Deputy. Once again, for the avoidance of doubt, not in this House, but perhaps in other parts of the world, I want to condemn unreservedly the terrorist attack by Hamas on Israel, where 2,000 people were killed, were tortured. We know now that many women were raped, and of course others were kidnapped and taken hostage and remain as hostages in Gaza today. While Israel has the right to defend itself, what it has done goes well beyond that, in my view, and that of the government. Israel is allowing a situation whereby 100 children a day are being killed in Gaza, and that is unbearable and unacceptable, and we deplore it and we condemn it. In terms of what we seek as a government, It is a new ceasefire so that the killing ends, so that we can get aid and relief into the Gaza Strip to relieve the suffering of the people there, and so that a new government, or at least a new administration, can be put in place in Gaza that doesn't involve Hamas and can be one that can become the basis for a lasting peace. And that is what we're seeking at EU level, at UN level, and in our engagements with other countries in the Middle East, making it very clear that there can be no expulsion of populations either from the West Bank or Gaza, that there can be no reoccupation, that there can be no further loss of territory, and that there can be no role for Hamas in the future governance of Gaza. And that is the position that we're advocating. We'll do it at EU level, we'll do it at UN level, and we'll do it in our contacts with other countries in the region. Specifically, the Taoiseach begins a 3-day visit today to the Middle East. He will travel to Saudi Arabia today, then onward to COP in Dubai, and he will use these visits as an important opportunity to engage with key actors in relation to the devastating war between Israel and Hamas, in which so many innocent lives have been lost. And I'll use my role as Taoiseach of the European Council next week to press for the European Union to adopt wording calling for a ceasefire in Gaza, and calling for the European Union in particular to take a much more active role in pushing for a two-state solution and Palestinian statehood, because the European Union has been far too passive for far too long when it comes to this conflict.
Well, I agree with you. The EU has been far too passive, and I'm glad to hear, Taoiseach, you've confirmed that you will be pressing at EU level next week for a text that will call for a permanent ceasefire, and indeed that will press for the two-state solution. But your government can do more here at home as well. Senator Francis Black's Occupied Territories Bill received cross-party support in the Seanad and indeed here in the Dáil, where Fianna Fáil and the Greens supported it previously. So will you act now to put that bill, to bring that bill through finally into law? You would have our support, and I think support across opposition for that. And will you also recognise Palestinian statehood? You made the commitment in the programme for government. Honour our commitment to recognise the state of Palestine as part of a lasting settlement of the conflict. So the text says in the programme for government. Is not now the time, Taoiseach, to take this brave and bold action, unilaterally, yes, but as a strong voice for peace within the EU, to take a strong stance, as we did to end South Africa's brutal apartheid regime. We can do more domestically, as well as doing more at international level to press our EU partners to look for a permanent ceasefire. We can do more to impose sanctions, trade sanctions on Israel, to pass the Occupied Territories Bill, and indeed to recognise Palestinian statehood.
Thanks very much, Deputy. The advice that we have from consistent Attorney Generals, and it remains the advice to Government, is that the Occupied Territories Bill can't be enacted by the Dáil because trade is an EU competence. And that's clear in the EU treaties, and that's why it can't be enacted, or even if it was enacted, it couldn't actually be made practical in terms of practical effect. And that's been the view, I think, now of 3 or 4 Attorney Generals from all sorts of different backgrounds in the last previous governments. In relation to recognition of the State of Palestine, the Government favours the recognition of the State of Palestine. This House and the Seanad have passed motions to that effect. We don't believe that the best way to do it is unilaterally. That will be dismissed, it will be ineffectual, and will be seen as an outlier acting unilaterally at a European level. What we would like to do is do it as part of a group of European countries, and I think that will be a more significant statement. And we don't just want it to be a statement, we want it to be part, perhaps, of an agreement to end the violence that's happening at the moment, and to put in place a new administration in Gaza for the day after. And that's the kind of conversation that we're having at the moment, for example, with Spain, which is a similar view to ours, and some other countries as well.
Thank you, Taoiseach. Deputy Noel Grealish on behalf of the regional group.
Taoiseach, in October 1999, plans were first drawn up for a ring road around Galway. Here we are now, more than 24 years later, with more than €40 million spent, and we still don't even have planning, never mind a ring road. Taoiseach, traffic has more than doubled in that 24 years, and there is an increasing anger in Galway about the traffic situation and the lack of progress and finding a solution. There are more than 100,000 traffic journeys made in the city's road network every day, and roads that are just not able to cope with the traffic volume. Galway City is slowly becoming a car park, if it isn't one already. Taoiseach, the commuters that are stuck in traffic every morning and every evening trying to get to and from work are getting extremely frustrated at the lack of progress on a proposed ring road for Galway. People are late for work, students are late for college, and patients are missing hospital appointments. I'm getting calls every day from frustrated drivers, as I'm sure my Oireachtas colleagues in Galway are also. One commuter has told me that in the last 10 years it has taken him double the time to travel to work. One local developer in Annadown, east of the city, who is doing a major development in Barna, west of the city, told me that it's taking him up to 3 hours to get to the site each morning with traffic. A person can commute from Galway to Dublin in less than 3 hours, and it takes nearly 3 hours, in less than 2 hours, and it takes nearly 3 hours to cross Galway City. The carbon footprint with all the cars and HGVs stuck in traffic morning, noon and night is huge. Taoiseach, in the gallery today is Councillor Donald Lyons, who was twice elected Mayor of Galway City and is currently the Deputy Mayor. Councillor Lyons is a very strong advocate for the ring road, along with his colleagues, and he is very frustrated that after 24 years we don't even have planning. Taoiseach, the businesses in Galway City are very worried that the lack of progress on a ring road will have a negative effect on their businesses, and they are demanding progress must happen urgently on the planning decision. In Parkmore, where most of the multinationals are based, they had to stagger their starting and finishing times to facilitate the workers. The people of Galway are saying is enough, and they want action. The Taoiseach, the question I'm asking you this afternoon is not from me, but from the tens of thousands of people that are stuck in traffic in Galway morning, noon and night. Will you, as head of government, take charge of this project and work with all stakeholders involved and get this project through the planning process as a matter of urgency?
Thank you. Taoiseach.
Thanks very much, Deputy. As we're discussing matters Galway, I think it would be good to put on the record the fact that today is a good news day in terms of investment in Galway, with a total allocation of €1 million confirmed for the East Galway Sports Campus, 2.5 million for the Renville Sports and Community Centre, and 20 million for the sports ground redevelopment in Connacht Rugby. And I know you and I have been strong supporters of that project for quite some time, as indeed is Minister Naughton and Deputy Kine, Deputy O'Keefe and everyone in the area, but really glad to see that money is confirmed for Galway City and County. And of course it's not just about rugby or sports. This will also be an important and much needed event space and conference centre in what is the fabulous city of Galway. One thing that would make the city even better will be the construction of the Galway Ring Road, and I am a supporter of the project. I can't interfere in the planning process, but I am glad to see that it is back before An Bord Pleanála, and I hope that they can make a decision soon, thus allowing us to go to tender, always aware that there's a risk, of course, of a judicial review, which is why these things need to be done carefully and properly. I know there are some people who will argue that the Galway Ring Road is contrary to our climate action plan. I do not believe that is the case. I believe the construction of the Galway Ring Road will free up the city and free up road space within the city for pedestrians and cyclists, making it more attractive to residents and tourists and investors. I also take the view that by the time it is built, and we know it will take many years to build, we will be at a situation whereby most of the energy that we produce, or most of the electricity we produce in this country, is from renewables, and many more people will be using electric cars and electric vehicles. And therefore the argument that building this road will mean more fossil fuels and more greenhouse gases being emitted in the environment, I think is a weak one. Because when you take into account the improvements of the public realm and life within the city, the reduction in through traffic and better air quality, and when you take into account the electrification of our electricity system and the increased uptake of electric vehicles, I think it can be argued, and I would argue, that this project is not contrary to our climate objectives. I do know, of course, that any major road construction project has an impact on the environment, but having visited the site of the Ballyforney-Macroom bypass and having seen that completed, was just interested to know how much building techniques have changed and how things can be done in a way that has a lesser impact on the environment than was the case in the past.
Thank you, Taoiseach. Deputy Grealish.
Taoiseach, also I want to welcome the announcement that was made this morning regarding the extra funding for Connacht Rugby to develop the sports ground and also for the Rinville Sports Project of 420,000. That is very welcome, Taoiseach. But Taoiseach, caught up in all of this are 54 homeowners who are technically prisoners in their homes, who are waiting for years at this stage for a decision to be made. Is this project going ahead or is it not? This is wrong, Taoiseach. It is very unfair on these people, a lot of whom are elderly and very stressed over this. The people of Galway are asking, how is it that so many other bypasses and road projects have been designed, funded and completed all around the country during that time, and we still don't even have planning for a ring road in Galway? Taoiseach, I'm not asking you to interfere in the planning process, which I know that you can't. All I'm asking is that you contact Bord Pleanála to expedite the decision for the people of Galway, and if the decision is to go ahead with the road, then we need to build it immediately. Taoiseach, this can't be allowed to drag on any longer. The people of Galway won't take it. Galway City is practically now a car park, night, noon and morning. People are getting extremely frustrated. And Taoiseach, I'm asking you as head of government, get involved and lead this and get this much needed project through the planning process and built.
Thank you, Deputy Grealish. Taoiseach, please.
Thanks, Deputy. I'll be in Galway on Monday morning, and will have the great privilege of officially opening the Moycullen bypass project that I was involved in initiating back when I was Minister for Transport. At the time, we thought it might be possible for the ring road and the Moycullen bypass to be built at the same time, so I understand the frustration that people must feel that one part is done and the bigger part is not. We know the backstory to this. Planning permission was granted by Bord Pleanála. It was struck down by the High Court. It's now back in before Bord Pleanála. And in terms of delays, Minister Bryan and I met with the Chairman and Chief Planner of Bord Pleanála only in the last week or two, asked them what they needed in order to ensure that decisions are made quicker when it comes to major public infrastructure projects. Not just this project, but projects like Bus Connects, like the Dart extension, which is very important to my constituency, like Metrolink, for example, and what they asked for we're doing. They have a full complement now of 15 board members, over 300 staff, and they'll be able to take on more. And also from next week, the new Planning and Environment Division of the High Court sits for the first time. And that means that if something does go to judicial review, the case can be heard and decided on more quickly than was the case before.
Thank you, Taoiseach. Now, Deputy Michael Fitzmaurice on behalf of the Independent Group.
Taoiseach, this country is made up of a lot of SMEs. In fact, I think there's 23,000 SMEs that employ between 9 to 44 or 5 people. And there's a huge amount of SMEs that employ larger amounts of people. Especially for the smaller ones, Taoiseach, in relation to carrying out their day-to-day works, and especially in the housing side of it, and groundworks and in machinery side of it. A lot of the people, they have to go and price the job. They look after the workers, and it's generally small setup that they're trying to do their best. Price the job, get the materials, put in the machinery, and basically make sure that their workers are looked after and put in wages and all of that. But of late, it seems to be getting harder and harder for smaller businesses in this country to survive. I note in the last week, to even get qualified in Irish Water, even if you work for county councils, you cannot get qualified unless you've done 3 jobs where Irish Water were. Now that is absolutely crazy. But to go back to what I'm on about, of late there's a thing for people from the country that drive to Dublin to build the houses or drive to any of the large cities. If you go over a certain distance, the subsistence that companies pay are private operators, and there is what we would call country money. And revenue are changing the goalposts. And it isn't that any of these people want to ever do anything wrong. They're changing the goalposts that before you pay it now, that you would have to be informing revenue. That's more paperwork, because what you have to understand is that these people don't have a dedicated section in their business. This is what I would call a small family-sized business that may be a husband and wife, that price the work, that look after the employees, that deal with the person they're doing the work for, and at night then they're trying to do paperwork. Now they're going to be asked before they give the money, and I guess there it's seeable every 6 months or every year when you do your accounts that you give out the country money or the subsistence. It's there in black and white. But they want you now to go forward and put this in every week before you even give it to them, say where they are and what they were at. And this is adding another layer to people that are actually struggling and people that are actually doing a lot of work in this country that's not recognised. And on top of that, there is now a consultative document out by Revenue that in relation to VAT, because you pay your VAT maybe every 2 months, every 6 months is what most businesses do. But now there's a consultative document out that's stating that as part of it, that every time that someone pays you, that you tell Revenue you got your VAT in. Now we're going to be constantly, these people will be constantly on a computer trying to comply with rules and regulations, and it's going to drive people away of setting up small businesses. And I am asking you, will you, along with your government, talk to the ministers and get a bit of common sense into this for the sake of small businesses surviving?
Thank you. Taoiseach.
Matter, and at the outset I want to concur with you about the importance of small and medium enterprises in Ireland. If you take all of our small businesses together, they employ more people than work in the public sector and the entire multinational sector combined, and of course employ people in every town and village and parish in the country. And we do appreciate that costs are rising for business. That's why Mr Coveney got approval this week for his €250 million package to help SMEs with the rising costs, and also that the administrative burden for small businesses can be a great one because they can't hire as many admin staff, don't have a HR department in the way a big company would, for example, or an accounts department. In relation to the specific matter the Deputy raises, the Finance Act of 2022 provides for new requirements under which employers must report to Revenue on or before they provide certain non-taxable benefits to their employees or directors. These are the small benefit exemption, the remote working daily allowance, and the travel and subsistence payments. Employers are already required to determine the tax treatment of such benefits before providing them to their employees or directors. For compliance purposes, they were also required to record and maintain information which supports that determination, for instance demonstrating that the benefit meets the specific conditions of the relevant tax exemption. While the new reporting requirements have not yet been brought into effect, it is intended they will be in place for the 1st of January. The time period between enactment and commencement is designed to allow sufficient time for Revenue to undertake stakeholder engagement and ensure successful implementation. To date, the stakeholder engagement process included issuing a survey to employers and their agents, considering submissions by practitioners and representative bodies, developing technical guidance for software providers, and scheduling a series of webinars for employers and their agents. Revenue will continue to issue guidance on the reporting requirements and participate in other industry events in the coming months. As with any change in established procedure, there is likely to be a bedding-in period where stakeholders will need to adapt to the new procedures. I'm assured that Revenue has incorporated information gained from stakeholder engagement into the development of the enhanced reporting regime so as to ensure that the mechanisms and processes will not be overly onerous and that employers will have a variety of mechanisms by which they can make their return.
Taoiseach, Deputy Fitzmaurice.
Yeah, Taoiseach, said a few words there. A survey. A survey. What will a survey do to a small business that's trying to do everything of, say, 4 or 5 people, and one at the head of it or 2 at the head of it, trying to make sure that everything is right? What the other word you used is software. We're back grand. If you have a HR department, you'll have someone dedicated to all of that. You talk about, and yes, Minister Coveney in trade and enterprise, yes, there is certain helps there. But at the end of the day, the people that I am talking about are the small businesses, the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 that are trying to do everything themselves to survive. And if revenue keep putting the likes of this in, these are the small people that do the groundworks on the building site for the big guys. These are the small people that might do the water main for the county council one time ago or for a group water scheme. These are the small people that don't have big enough of a turnover for this procurement set up that you have to go by now in most aspects of Ireland, or you're kicked out. You won't even get on the list of suppliers. But what we must remember is, these are the people that get up early in the morning and do the bread and butter work to keep Ireland ticking over. And what the Finance Act is doing is putting more pressure on these, that some of them will just say, it's not worth it, because there's only so many hours in a day. There's only so much you can do. And why would you even bother if you're being pushed out of business?
Thanks very much, Deputy. As is often the case when it comes to a new set of rules or a new set of regulations, there can be a bedding-in period. And once they're in place for a few months, very often they work well and people's concerns are allayed. But that is not always the case, and we have to be flexible and mindful of these things and sometimes make changes if they need to be made. With that in mind, the Department of Finance will continue to monitor this matter as Revenue continues to engage with stakeholders. As it currently stands, there are no plans to deviate from the commencement of the enhanced reporting requirements from the 1st of January. Minister Coveney, who's sat beside me here, has a particular remit for business and is aware of the matter, as is Minister McGrath, and will certainly monitor the situation and make sure that this happens as seamlessly as possible.
Thank you, Taoiseach. That concludes Leaders' questions.